Extinction is not a word that most people associate with the present day, but according to scientists at the Center for Biological Diversity, we are currently, right now, in the 6th mass extinction. While there is some debate about whether we're actually in the middle of the 6th mass extinction or just inching ever closer, the fact is that we're losing species at 1,000 to 10,000 times the background rate, which is 1 to 5 species every year. By the mid-century, 30 to 50% of all species could be on the decline. People have already begun to respond to this crisis, as shown by the insurgence of environmental conservation NGOs, but there were gaps concerning public involvement and funding. Enter zoos. In the past few decades, zoos have transformed to become the forefront organization for conservation efforts. So while it's true that zoos started out purely as entertainment, they have now evolved to prioritize research, education, and conservation. In preparing for this speech, I asked several of my coworkers what immediately came to mind when I said the word zoo, and for most of them it was the same. They thought of small, sterile metal cages and malnourished animals. If this was the 1800s, they'd be right, but zoos have changed tremendously since then. In 2015, ABC reporter Carrie Phillips conducted an interview with Dr. Nigel Rothfelds, the author of Savages and Beasts, The Birth of the Modern Zoo. And in that interview, Rothfelds explains how the modern zoo evolved from the private collections of hundreds of years ago. Menageries, usually royal collections of animals, were turned into zoos in the 18th and 19th centuries, and they became hugely popular. However, the owners had problems maintaining them for the simple reason that they didn't know enough about how to take care of the animals. For many, very little was known about their biology, their diets, their group composition, and their reproductive behaviors, which meant zoos lost animals on the regular and couldn't breed them. During the turn of the 19th century, German animal trader Karl Hagenbeck was the first to open a zoo with barless exhibits that somewhat emulated the animals' natural habitats. His theory was that it would draw out more of the animals' natural behaviors, and it worked. His zoo became hugely popular and has influenced how zoos are designed to this day. The American conservation movement in the early 20th century coincided with the founding of the first American zoos, and they became very much concerned with natural history, scientific study and education, and wildlife preservation. This led to some of the first captive breeding programs to repopulate indigenous species, notably the American bison, which was nearly extinct before the Bronx Zoo started their program. Animal ethology and social biology became a field of interest in the 80s and 90s, and has all but forced zoos to make conservation one of their top priorities. Ben Mintier is the author of The Ark and Beyond, and in his book, he closely examines the role of zoos in conservation. According to him, the increased interest in animal welfare and rights led to the zoo becoming a sort of surrogate Noah's Ark, essentially breeding captive populations to protect them against all-out extinction. This model was solidified into the core definition of what is a zoo in the 80s with the creation of what is now the AZA, or the Association of Zoos and Aquariums. One of the AZA's primary focuses is conservation, and they publish reports from all over the country, work on field conservation, promote green business practices, and give zoos funding for conservation projects. Over the years, conservation efforts have taken on many different forms. Some of these include ex situ and in situ conservation, field conservation, and zoo-based visitor conservation. Ex situ conservation deals with conserving animals' natural habitats, while in situ refers to conservation outside of the animal's natural habitat. In situ is what most people think of when they think of conservation, since it concerns captive breeding and reintroduction programs. Most zoos are now trying to combine in situ and ex situ programs, which have historically been very separate fields, in order to speed up research and hopefully prevent more animals from even reaching threatened statuses in the first place. Field conservation, as defined by the AZA, describes efforts that directly contribute to the long-term survival of species in natural ecosystems and habitats. It includes conducting research on species protection in the field, promoting conservation awareness, advocating for the animals, and raising funds. Zoo-based visitor education is exactly what it sounds like. those educational shows that zookeepers put on, usually with the animals, that sometimes involve visitor interaction. This theory rests on the expectation that the better people understand the animal's behavior, history, and status of threatened wildlife, animals that they can see and touch and interact with and sometimes form a bond with, the more likely they will be to engage in pro-conservation behavior. These techniques have been used to prevent countless extinctions. The animals saved by zoo conservation range from large mammals to birds to a surprisingly high number of frog species. Before the 1800s, more than 30 million bison lived in North America, but industrial-scale hunting left fewer than 1,000 during that century. It is only because of the in situ breeding program at the Bronx Zoo that nearly 50,000 remain today. A number of other species in similar situations due to overhunting, habitat loss, or the introduction of invasive species into their habitats were repopulated in this way, and those include the California condor, the red wolf, the golden lion tamarin, and the Humboldt penguin, and that hardly scratches the surface. One of the AZA's biggest and most successful conservation programs is called Frog Watch USA. In just the past couple of decades, frog populations have decreased dramatically in the US and around the world, which is especially worrying for us because amphibians have been crucial in the field of medicine for the compounds in their skin, which are being tested for cancer-curing and HIV-curing properties. Nearly every AZA-accredited zoo has a frog conservation program, which has kept dozens of species in existence, such as the Panamanian golden frog, which is now unfortunately extinct in the wild. So, zoos are uniquely positioned to combat these threats to animal populations. And the reason involvement is so crucial is because of the human impact that we have on animals' environments and on their populations. Even though extinction is a natural phenomenon, the rate that we're currently experiencing it at is not. Animals simply cannot evolve quickly enough to survive. But zoos are able to raise money, provide conservationist services, do crucial research not possible in the wild, and educate the public all at the same time. And that makes them invaluable to the conservation effort.